The wind was sharp that morning, cutting through the narrow streets of the alien colony like a blade. Snowflakes fell slowly, landing on the broken metal roofs and melting into dirty water. In the middle of the busy market street, a small alien girl walked slowly, her thin legs trembling with each step. Her skin was pale and slightly blue from the cold, and her clothes were nothing more than a torn shirt and a skirt that reached her knees. Her bare feet touched the frozen ground, leaving small, wet footprints behind. In her hands, she held an empty bottle. Clutching it as if it were the most precious thing in the world, she stopped at the first stall, where a merchant was selling bottles of milk. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of the crowd as she asked, "Please, just a little milk for my sister." The merchant didn't even look at her. He just waved her away with a hand, muttering about customers who could actually pay. The girl tried again. At the next stall, her voice trembling, "Please, I'll repay you when I'm older." The woman behind the counter laughed, shaking her head, and turned to serve another customer. The girl's shoulders sank, but she didn't give up. She moved from one stall to another, repeating the same words. Some ignored her completely. Others frowned and told her to move along. A few laughed, their voices cruel in the cold air. The market was loud, but the girl's small voice carried a desperate edge that, to the right ears, could not be ignored. One pair of ears did hear it, the ears of a human trader standing near the end of the street. His name was Marcus, and he had been watching the girl for some time. He noticed the way her fingers were stiff from the cold, the way her lips were cracked, and the way her eyes darted nervously, as if she feared someone might chase her away. Marcus had seen hunger before, on many worlds. But something about this child's determination made him pause. He stepped away from his stall, walking slowly so as not to frighten her. When he was close enough, he crouched down so their eyes were level. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, her grip tightening on the empty bottle. "Lyra," she whispered. "I need milk for my baby sister. She's sick, she's crying, she's hungry." Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed steady. Marcus saw no greed in them, only a fierce kind of love. "How old is your sister?" he asked. "2," Lyra said. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday." Around them, the market kept moving, the other merchants pretending not to notice. A few cast annoyed glances toward Marcus, as if wondering why a human would waste his time, but Marcus ignored them. He stood and said, "Come with me." Lyra followed him, her small steps quick to keep up with his longer stride. When they reached his stall, Marcus picked up a bottle and poured fresh, warm milk into the empty one she carried. The steam rose from the opening, and Lyra's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe it was real. "For your sister," Marcus said simply. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "I'll repay you when I'm older. I promise." Her voice carried no doubt, as if this promise was carved into her very soul. Marcus didn't answer right away. He watched her clutch the bottle to her chest like a treasure. Something deep inside him stirred a memory of cold nights and empty plates from his own childhood. He took a deep breath and said, "Let's get her fed before the milk gets cold." Lyra nodded quickly, leading the way through twisting alleys. The snow was heavier now, falling in silent sheets. The path was uneven, passing piles of scrap, metal, and old crates. Finally, they reached a small cargo container pushed against a wall, its door hanging crooked. "This is home," Lyra said quietly. Inside, it was dim and smelled faintly of rust. On the floor, under a thin cloth, lay a tiny alien child with closed eyes and a weak cry. Lyra knelt beside her, lifting her gently and holding the bottle to her lips. The baby drank greedily, her small hands reaching up toward her sister's face. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching without a word. He saw how carefully Lyra held the baby, how she whispered to her between sips, promising that everything would be okay. In that moment, Marcus understood that this was more than hunger. This was survival, and survival. In any corner of the galaxy was something humans respected when the baby had finished drinking. Lyra laid her back down, tucking the cloth around her. She turned to Marcus, her eyes brighter now. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I will not forget this." Marcus gave a small nod. He didn't stay long. He knew the sisters needed rest. But as he walked back through the snow-covered streets, he felt something shift inside him, for reasons he could not yet explain. He knew this would not be the last time he saw them, and he knew he would do more than just give milk next time. The next morning, the market was just as noisy and cold as before. Merchants called out their prices, voices rising above the wind. Children ran between stalls, carrying baskets, hoping to earn a few coins. Marcus stood at his stall, arranging goods, but his eyes kept drifting toward the far end of the street. He told himself he was only checking for new customers, but in truth, he was looking for a small figure with pale skin and tired eyes. He didn't have to wait long. Lyra appeared, walking slowly, the empty bottle in her hands again. Her steps were hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome to approach him. Marcus waved her over. "Did your sister drink all the milk?" he asked, his voice calm. Lyra nodded. "She slept after. She hasn't cried since." Her words were soft, but there was relief in her face. Marcus poured more milk into her bottle without asking for payment. Around them, other merchants watched, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. One alien muttered loudly, "The human is wasting his stock." Another laughed and said, "Next, the beggars will be lining up." Marcus ignored them. He had seen enough in his travels to know that kindness was never wasted. As Lyra clutched the bottle, Marcus noticed the way she stood straight. Even though she was small and thin, her eyes never left his. As if she wanted to prove she was not afraid to speak. "You said you would repay me when you're older," Marcus said. "Why did you promise that?" Lyra blinked, as if the question surprised her. "Because it's true," she replied simply. "I don't want to take without giving back. It's not how my mother taught me." Marcus felt a small ache in his chest. He wondered what kind of mother raised a child to think this way. He also wondered where she was now. But he didn't ask. Something told him the answer might be painful. Instead, he asked, "Do you need anything else for your sister?" Lyra hesitated. "Food would be good, but milk is more important." Marcus opened a small crate and handed her a packet of soft bread. Her eyes widened, and she held it carefully, almost as if it might break. "Eat some too," Marcus said. "You can't take care of her if you're hungry." Lyra gave a small nod, though he could see she was already thinking about saving it for her sister. When she turned to leave, Marcus walked with her. The snow crunched under their feet. He asked about her sister's name. "She's called Sella," Lyra said. "She used to laugh a lot before the sickness." Her voice went quiet after that. Marcus didn't press her for more details. He could feel her trust growing, and he didn't want to break it. They reached the shelter again, and Sella was awake this time. The baby's big dark eyes followed them as they entered. When she saw the bottle, she kicked her small feet under the thin cloth. Lyra fed her first, then broke a small piece of bread and placed it in her own mouth. Marcus leaned against the doorway, watching them. He noticed the way Sela's breathing sounded easier now. The color in her cheeks was faint, but it was better than yesterday. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Sela drinking. Marcus found himself thinking of the many planets he had visited. In all of them, poverty had the same face, tired eyes, thin hands, and the quiet courage to keep moving. And in all of them, the choice to help or to walk away was always the same. Today, he had chosen to help, and it felt right. When the baby was done, Lyra wiped her mouth and tucked her back in. She looked up at Marcus and said, "If you don't come tomorrow, I will still remember you." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small scarf. It was old but warm, and he wrapped it around her neck. "Wear this," he said. "The cold can steal your strength." Lyra's hands touched the fabric, and she smiled for the first time. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. Outside, the market noise continued. A few merchants glared as Marcus walked back alone. One called out, "You can't save everyone." Human, Marcus didn't answer. In his mind, he wasn't trying to save everyone. He was just making sure one little girl and her sister lived to see another day. But as he closed his stall that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that this simple act of kindness might pull him into something far larger. And in the shadows at the far end of the market, a pair of eyes was watching him. Not with gratitude, but with interest. The kind of interest that meant trouble was coming. The next day came with a softer wind, but the air was still cold enough to bite at exposed skin. Marcus opened his stall early, arranging his goods with practiced hands, but his eyes kept scanning the street, searching for that small figure he had come to expect. Lyra arrived a short while later, the scarf he had given her wrapped tightly around her neck. The bottle in her hands was empty again, and she walked with more confidence than before. When she saw Marcus, her steps quickened, and for a brief moment, she almost looked like a child running toward a friend. "Good morning, Marcus," greeted. His voice lighter than usual. Lyra gave a shy smile and handed him the bottle. He filled it with fresh milk, the steam rising in the cold air. She took it carefully, holding it close as if guarding it from the world. "Thank you," she said. "Sella is better. She laughed last night." Marcus felt a small warmth spread in his chest at those words. It had been years since anyone's health had meant so much to him. They walked together to her shelter. As they reached the narrow alley, Marcus noticed the marks on the doorframe, deep scratches, fresh and uneven. "Did someone come here?" he asked. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. "Two men. They looked inside, but I told them to go away." Her voice carried more courage than her size suggested. Marcus didn't like it. He knew what kind of men would take an interest in a place like this. Still, he said nothing for now, not wanting to frighten her. Inside, Sella was awake and alert. Her dark eyes focused on the bottle immediately, and her small hands reached for it. Lyra sat beside her, feeding her slowly, making sure she didn't spill a drop. The baby drank greedily, her cheeks moving with each swallow. Marcus stood near the wall, watching the two sisters. It struck him how Lyra's face softened whenever she looked at Sella. For someone so young, she carried herself with the patience of a much older soul. When the bottle was empty, Sella gave a small sigh and leaned into her sister's arms. Lyra tucked the thin cloth around her and looked up at Marcus. "She smiled at me this morning," Lyra said, her own lips curving into a faint smile. Marcus noticed the difference. It wasn't forced. It wasn't shy. It was the smile of someone who had felt a little hope again, and that made something tighten in his chest. "I want to do more for you," Marcus said, the words surprising even himself. Lyra tilted her head. "Why?" "Because no one should have to fight alone, especially not children." Marcus replied. She blinked at him, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe him. But instead of questioning further, she simply nodded. "I can work," she offered quickly. "I can carry things, or clean, or help you sell things in the market." Marcus shook his head gently. "Not yet. You need to take care of Sella first." He gave her a small pouch of dried fruit and bread. "Make this last," he said. "It will help both of you." Lyra accepted it with both hands, her posture straight, her eyes clear. It wasn't the look of someone receiving charity. It was the look of someone accepting a responsibility. As Marcus turned to leave, he caught a flicker of movement outside the door, a shadow gone as quickly as it appeared. He stepped into the alley. Scanning both directions, the street was empty, but the unease in his gut grew stronger. Someone was watching them, and he didn't believe it was out of kindness. Back at the market, the whispers had started again. Human trader is feeding the strays. One alien muttered, "He'll regret it." Another said, shaking his head. Marcus ignored them, but he couldn't ignore the truth, helping Lyra. And Sela had made them visible. And in places like this, visibility was dangerous. That night, Marcus lay in his small rented room above the stall. The wind rattled the shutters, and the faint hum of distant machinery filled the silence. He thought about the smile on Lyra's face, the way she had held her sister. He thought about the scratches on the doorframe, and he thought about the shadow in the alley. Something told him this was only the beginning, whatever trouble was coming. He couldn't walk away now, not when two small lives depended on him. The decision was already made, even if he hadn't spoken it aloud. Tomorrow, he would take steps to protect them. Because in Marcus's mind, once a human decided to stand beside someone, they didn't leave, not until the danger was gone. The market was louder than usual that morning. Merchants argued over prices. Customers haggled fiercely, and the smell of cooked food drifted through the cold air. Marcus set up his stall, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd. He was looking for Lyra, and also for anything unusual. Ever since he had seen that shadow near her shelter, the feeling of being watched had not left him. Lyra arrived a little later than usual. She walked quickly, clutching the empty bottle in one hand and the scarf around her neck with the other. When she reached him, Marcus noticed a faint bruise on her arm. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "It's nothing," but her eyes slid away. Marcus didn't press her. Not yet. Instead, he filled her bottle with warm milk and handed her a small loaf of bread. "Eat on the way," he said. "Don't wait until you get home." As they walked through the alleys, Marcus noticed more eyes following them. Some belonged to merchants, others to people he didn't recognize. One group of rough-looking aliens leaned against a wall, smirking as they passed. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of look, the kind that measured weakness and opportunity. He kept himself between Lyra and them until they reached her shelter. Inside, Sela was awake and smiling. Her cheeks had more color now, and she reached for the bottle the moment she saw it. Lyra sat with her, feeding her slowly, while Marcus stood watch by the door. The sound of the baby drinking was soft, almost calming, but Marcus couldn't relax. His mind kept returning to the bruise on Lyra's arm and the looks in the market. When Sela was finished, Lyra wiped her mouth and tucked her back in. "Thank you again," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Marcus nodded. "Lyra, if anyone bothers you, you tell me, understand?" She hesitated, then nodded once. Her eyes said she understood. But they also said she had no idea what he might do if it happened again. Back at the market, the rumors had grown louder. "Human trader is protecting some stray girl." One merchant sneered, "He's wasting his time." Another said, Marcus ignored them. Upon he noticed the same rough-looking group from before was hanging around the edges of the street. They weren't buying anything, they were watching. Marcus made sure to keep his stall between him and their line of sight. Later that afternoon, an older merchant named Bran approached Marcus. Bran had run a stall here for years and had seen trouble come and go. "You should be careful," Bran said, his voice low. "Those men you saw, they work for Jorak's crew." Marcus didn't react outwardly, but the name was familiar. Jorak was a small-time gang leader who liked to act like a warlord. He had a habit of taking what he wanted, especially from those who couldn't. "Fight back, they've noticed you," Bran added, "and they've noticed the girl." Marcus thanked him, but his mind was already moving ahead. If Jorak's crew was interested, it meant trouble was coming, and soon, that evening, Marcus left the market early. He walked to Lyra's shelter, keeping to the shadows. When he arrived, he saw two figures standing near the door. They were talking in low voices, one of them holding a small metal pipe Marcus approached silently until he was only a few steps away. The men turned, surprised. "What do you want, human?" One of them spat. Marcus's voice was calm but cold. "I want you to leave, and not come back." They laughed, the kind of laugh that meant they thought he was bluffing. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch. The silence stretched until finally, one of them muttered something and they walked off. Marcus watched until they disappeared around the corner. Only then did he knock on the door. Lyra opened it, her eyes wide. "Were they here before I came?" Marcus asked. She nodded slowly. They said I owed them for the milk and food." Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. He knew exactly what kind of payment they would demand if he wasn't there. He crouched so his eyes met hers. "Listen to me, Lyra," he said. "You and Sela don't owe anyone anything. Not them, not me, no one." She swallowed hard and nodded again. Marcus stayed until she locked the door behind him. Then he walked back into the cold night. Every step he took was heavy with the same. Thought if Jorak's men came again, they wouldn't leave so easily. The next day began with a strange quiet in the market. The usual shouting of prices felt weaker, as if the merchants were distracted. Marcus noticed it the moment he opened his stall. Eyes were watching him, but not the eyes of customers. They were the eyes of people who had heard something and were waiting to see what would happen. Lyra did not come that morning at first. Marcus thought she might be late, but as the hours passed, his worry grew heavier. By midday, he could no longer stay at the stall. He told a nearby merchant to watch it for him and left. His boots crunched over the thin layer of snow as he took the familiar path to her shelter. When he reached the alley, his stomach tightened. The door to the cargo container was hanging open, one hinge broken. Inside, the thin cloth that served as a blanket was on the floor. Lyra was there, sitting on the ground. Her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes were red, her voice shaking. "They took her," she whispered. "They took Sela." Marcus stepped inside quickly, crouching in front of her. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Men from the market," she said. "The ones with the scars and the metal pipe." Her voice cracked. "They said I owed them, and since I had nothing else, they took her." For a moment, Marcus felt something cold settle inside him. He had seen gangs do many things in his life, but taking a child crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Do you know where they went?" he asked. Lyra shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But people say they hide things, and people." In the old warehouse near the edge of the port, Marcus stood slowly, his hands curling into fists. He had passed that warehouse before. It was big, dark, and far from the patrol routes of the local guards. A perfect place for someone like Jorak to keep stolen lives. Lyra's small voice broke the silence. Please bring her back," she said. Marcus looked at her and felt something hard and unshakable take root in his chest. "You have my word," he said. "I will." He left the shelter and made his way toward the port district. The air grew colder there, the smell of rust and fuel mixing in the wind. The warehouse stood at the far end, its walls patched with mismatched metal plates. No guards at the front, but Marcus knew that didn't mean it was unprotected. He walked past it once, pretending to be a trader inspecting the area. From the corner of his eye, he spotted two men leaning against the back wall, talking quietly. One of them had the metal pipe. Marcus filed the detail away and kept moving. He circled to a side alley, his boots making almost no sound on the frozen ground. From here, he could see a small side door, rusted but still functional. He waited until the sound of a passing vehicle covered his steps, then moved to the door. It was locked. But Marcus had been in enough places like this to know how to deal with that. A thin strip of metal and a steady hand were all it took to slide the latch free. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. Crates and barrels were stacked high, leaving narrow pathways between them. Somewhere deeper inside, he heard muffled voices and the sound of a child crying. Marcus moved toward. The sound every step measured. His hand rested on the small blade hidden under his coat. He turned a corner and froze. There were cages, half a dozen of them. Some held stolen goods, others children. Sela was in one of them, curled up in a corner, her small eyes wide with fear. Two of Jorak's men stood nearby, talking and laughing. Marcus's jaw tightened. He stepped forward silently until he was close enough to hear their words. They were talking about selling the children to off-world traders. The casual way they spoke made Marcus's blood burn. He waited for the right moment when one man turned away to check a crate. Then Marcus moved, fast and without hesitation. The first man went down with a sharp strike to the side of the head. The second spun around, swinging the metal pipe. Marcus blocked it with his arm, pain shooting through him. But he used the momentum to drive his blade into the man's leg. The scream echoed through the warehouse. Marcus grabbed the keys from the nearest table and unlocked the cages. "Come on," he said to the children. His voice calm despite the chaos. Sela clung to him immediately, her small arms wrapping around his neck. The other children followed, their eyes wide but trusting. Marcus led them out through the side door. The cold air hit them like a wave, but it was better than the darkness inside. He didn't stop moving until they were deep in the maze of alleys. Only then did he set Sela down. She reached for Lyra, who was running toward them from the direction of the shelter. The sisters held each other tightly, crying into each other's shoulders. Marcus stood a few steps away, his breath steady. This was not over. Jorak's crew would not let this go. But for now, the sisters were safe, and that was enough. The sun had already dipped low behind the metal skyline of the colony. The air felt heavier, as if the streets themselves knew trouble was coming. Marcus walked beside Lyra and Sela, making sure they stayed close. The baby was bundled in the scarf now, her head resting on Lyra's shoulder. They moved quickly, keeping to the less crowded paths. Marcus didn't want Jorak's men to spot them before they reached safety. When they finally reached the shelter, Lyra opened the door with shaking hands. Inside, the cold air was trapped between the metal walls, but it was still safer than the streets. Marcus set down a small crate of supplies he had taken from his stall before leaving the market. There was bread, dried fruit, and another bottle of milk. "Eat something," he told Lyra. "You both need your strength." She nodded and began tearing small pieces of bread for Sela, who took them eagerly. Marcus sat on an overturned crate, his eyes scanning the door. He didn't relax. Not for a second. He knew Jorak's crew wouldn't let this go, by now. The two men he had left in the warehouse would have told their leader exactly what happened. And Marcus's face wouldn't be hard to remember in a place where humans were rare. Lyra looked at him between feeding Sela. "Are they going to come back?" She asked quietly. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And when they do, I'll be ready." Her eyes widened a little. But she didn't ask how. She only said, "I don't want them to hurt you." Marcus gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They'll try," he said, "but I'm not easy to hurt." He stayed until both sisters had eaten and Sela was asleep. Then he stood and pulled his coat tighter. "I'll be back before night," he said. "Where are you going?" Lyra asked, "To make sure no one touches this place without going through me first." Marcus replied. He went straight to his stall, closing it for the day from a hidden compartment under the counter. He pulled out a small black case. Inside was a compact blaster and a set of reinforced gloves, tools he hadn't needed in years. He checked the charge on the weapon, then slid it into the inside of his coat. The gloves went into his pocket. He didn't plan on shooting unless he had to, but he knew from experience that sometimes fights didn't give you a choice as the sky turned darker. Marcus positioned himself near the market's main road. From here, he could see anyone approaching from the port side, the direction Jorak's men would most likely come from. It didn't take long. 4 figures appeared in the distance, moving with the slow confidence of people who thought they owned the street. The leader, broad-shouldered with a deep scar running from his jaw to his ear, carried himself like he was untouchable. Marcus recognized him immediately. Jorak. They walked straight past the market stalls, ignoring the merchant's Jorak's eyes scanned the street until they locked on Marcus. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile that didn't belong to a friendly man. "Human," he said, stopping just a few steps away. "You have something of mine." Marcus didn't move. "You mean the child you stole?" "She's not yours." The smile faded from Jorak's face, replaced by a cold stare. "You're new here," Jorak said, "so I'll give you one chance. Stay out of my way, and I'll forget this insult." Marcus shook his head. "You're not taking her, and you're not touching her sister." The street had gone quiet. Merchants had stopped talking. Customers had stopped moving. Everyone was watching. Jorak's men shifted slightly, hands brushing the grips of their weapons. Marcus could feel the tension in the air, thick as smoke. If a fight started here, the market would turn into chaos. But Jorak didn't draw first. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "You've made an enemy," he said, "and enemies don't last long here." Marcus didn't flinch. "I've had worse enemies," he said, "and I'm still here." For a moment, neither man moved. Then Jorak stepped back, motioning for his men to follow. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end. It was only a warning. They would come again, and next time, they wouldn't come in the open. That night, Marcus returned to Lyra's shelter. He checked the door and the small window. Reinforcing them with metal scraps from a nearby pile, he showed Lyra how to lock the door from the inside and told her not to open it for anyone but him. She listened carefully, her eyes serious. "What if they come when you're not here?" she asked. "Then you hide, and you don't make a sound." Marcus said, "I'll find you after," when Sela stirred in her sleep. Lyra covered her gently with the scarf. Marcus watched the 2 sisters for a moment, then stepped outside into the freezing air. The stars above the colony were dim through the haze. He pulled his coat tighter and walked toward his stall. He would not sleep that night. Instead, he would be watching, because he knew Jorak's next move was coming, and when it did, Marcus would be ready. The night was colder than usual. The wind whistled through the narrow streets, carrying with it the distant hum of engines from the port. Marcus stood in the shadows across from Lyra's shelter, his back against a wall. His eyes never left the door. Every sound, a footstep, a whisper, the scrape of metal made his hand tighten around the grip of his weapon. Hours passed in silence. Then, from the far end of the alley, movement, 4 figures appeared, their shapes dark against the pale snow. Marcus recognized the broad shoulders of Jorak leading the way. They moved quietly, but their intent was written in every step. This was no warning. This was an attack. Marcus waited until they were only a few meters from the shelter. Then he stepped out of the shadows, his voice sharp in the cold air, looking for something. Jorak stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Looking for someone," he replied. "A little girl and her sister. You've been keeping them." Marcus didn't move. "They're not yours." Jorak's smile was thin and cruel. "Everything here is mine if I want it." One of Jorak's men stepped forward, reaching for his weapon. Marcus moved first, his blaster out and aimed before the man could draw. "Not tonight," Marcus said, his voice low but unshaking. The man froze, but Jorak only chuckled. "You think you can stop us?" "You're one man." Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "One man who's not afraid of you." The alley seemed to shrink as the tension thickened. Snow crunched under Marcus's boots as he took a step closer. "You cross this line," he said, gesturing to the space between them, "and you don't walk away." Jorak's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't speak. Instead, he lunged forward. The moment his foot hit the line, Marcus fired. The blast hit the ground near Jorak's feet, sending up a spray of sparks and forcing him back. The sudden noise brought faces to the windows above, market merchants, residents, people who had been too afraid to speak up before. Now they watched, whispers spreading like fire through the cold air. Jorak's crew glanced around nervously. They hadn't expected witnesses. Marcus's voice carried through the alley. "This ends now. You leave them alone, or you answer to me." Jorak's jaw clenched. "You think you've won because you scared us off?" He spat. Marcus shook his head. "No, I've won because everyone here sees you for what you are." The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. Then, slowly, Jorak backed away. Motioning for his men to follow, they melted into the shadows, their footsteps fading into the distance. Marcus stayed in the alley until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he turn toward the shelter. The door opened before he reached it, and Lyra stood there, her eyes wide. "Are you hurt?" she asked quickly. Marcus shook his head. "No, they won't be bothering you anymore." Behind her, Sella stirred, letting out a soft sound in her sleep. Lyra's shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. She stepped aside to let him in. The small space was warm compared to the freezing alley. Marcus sat on the crate near the door, rubbing his hands together. "You were outside the whole time?" Lyra asked. "Yes," Marcus said simply, "and I'll keep watching as long as I need to." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra walked over and placed something in his hands. The scarf he had given her. "I want you to have it back," she said, "to remember that you helped us." Marcus shook his head, pushing it gently back toward her. "No, you keep it, so you remember that someone cared enough to fight for you." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded slowly. Holding the scarf close again, Sella stirred once more and opened her eyes when she saw Marcus. She gave a small smile before drifting back to sleep. It was a simple thing, but it warmed him more than any fire could in that moment. Marcus realized that the promise Lyra had made to repay him when she was older had already been fulfilled. Not with money, not with goods, but with trust. Trust was a rare currency in places like this, and he had earned it. Marcus stood to leave, knowing he would return in the morning. As he stepped outside, the snow had stopped falling. The air was still cold, but the sky above the colony was clearing. Stars peeked through the haze, faint but steady. He took a deep breath. Whatever came next, whether Jorak tried again or not, he knew one thing for certain. Humans didn't walk away from those they chose to protect, and he wasn't walking away from Lyra and Sella. Not now, not ever.